During the great Garmin outage of 2020, I decided it was time to unclip this Garmin Edge 520 right here. I ended up getting this Wahoo Element bolt. I could have just ridden with the new device, but for some reason I ended up putting both of them on the bike at the same time, with the second one mounted right there behind the steerer tube. Both of them had a really clear view of the sky, they were both reading from the same power meter, and to the extent possible, I ensured that the settings were the same. I could see what was going on both devices at the same time, and that's when I first noticed that the average power and lap power fields on the Wahoo were always reading a lot lower than they did on the Garmin. So I came to an indoor trainer where I could more precisely control what I was doing during the ride. I ended up identifying that the declines would only happen on the Wahoo if I stopped pedaling. That is, if I coasted. So as long as I had continual pedaling, the instantaneous power and the lap power fields on both these devices were really in sync. They were showing up exactly the same, but as soon as I coasted, the power on the Wahoo would decline faster. I didn't know which one of them was more correct, and so I came up with a simple test to figure out which one was. Basic math would tell you that if you've ridden, for example, for 5 minutes, that's 300 seconds, at 200 watts, that if you coast for any period of time, you can figure out what the average should be. So that at 5 minutes and 30 seconds, you should be seeing 181.8 watts, for example. So in this test that you can see right here, the Garmin's reading a little bit higher, and that's because, as occurred on both devices, the power pedals transmitted power a couple seconds after my feet actually stopped moving, so I'm kind of okay with that. But the fact that the Wahoo is showing less than 181.8 implies something very strange. What it means is for the time period between 5 minutes and 5 minutes and 30 seconds that I'm measuring, that I must have actually done not 0, but negative 42 watts. You can recalculate the values for any of the times that were shown in this video, 510, 520, whatever it is, and you get values that vary between negative 35, negative 48, anything like that, but they're all in the ballpark of that negative 42. I changed the test up a little bit, and I went to pedaling for 2 minutes continuously and then coasting for 30 and 60 seconds, and in that case I was getting values in the ballpark of negative 20 to 25 watts. Because a lot of manufacturers are quick to blame other companies when you find an error in their product, those first videos were being made using Favero Asioma pedals, so I later switched to using a Cyclops hammer that I'm sitting on right now, and the results from that were unfortunately even worse. In a lot of cases, it was in excess of a negative 150 watts for around 30 seconds of coasting. Really crazy. So the difference in this simple test, as startling as negative watts could be, might not seem that big to you at first, since it's only 5 watts difference between the two devices. But because a real ride actually includes a lot of steady pedaling and coasting and steady pedaling and coasting, the difference between the two devices usually would start showing between 20 and 30 watts at the end of the ride. You might have also noticed that I was displaying kilojoules while I was doing these tests. Because the time and the average power were the same, you would think that the kilojoules fields would be the same as well. In fact, you should be able to calculate joules if you know the time and the power because of the metric system. If 1 watt equals 1 joule per second, then if we multiply the time by the watts, we get the joules, divide by 1,000, there's your kilojoules. So the fact that sometimes on the Wahoo, it was showing up in the teens for 300 seconds at 200 watts, and then other times showing up as 40, when basic math tells you it should have been 60, I was simply baffled. What are they calculating kilojoules from if it's not from the power and from the time? I have the basic expectation that if I take the distance displayed on this device and divide it by the time, that it will match the average speed displayed on this device, right? Well, I also expect that if I take the power displayed, the average power displayed on this device, and multiply it by the time, it will match the kilojoules. But unfortunately, that's simply not the case. So when we put these two together, it means that the average and lap power that's shown on this device are unpredictably low. Sometimes 10%, sometimes 15%. You really can't tell, and it depends on how much you've been pedaling versus coasting during that particular ride. But the kilojoules are also low. Why do kilojoules matter? Well, a lot of people use kilojoules as a proxy for calories, and so they use it to inform their nutrition on a ride. So being 50% off might not be a big deal on a 500 kilojoule ride, but when it's on a 3,000 kilojoule ride, that really matters. So where things get even stranger though, is that this device, as well as the Garmin, they produce files that are called fit files, .fit, that contains all the raw data from your your ride. I fully expected that the numbers that are showing up on here for the lap averages or total ride averages are exactly the same as they're being recorded to that fit file, but what I found out is that if I exported the file to another application that recalculates all the data, they show up correct. They show up exactly in line as what they did on the Garmin. So I would magically have 20 or 30 watts appear at the end of the ride, in addition to a really large number of kilojoules. I'm going to show an example here of a recent ride that I did as viewed in the Wahoo Element Bolt app, which was exactly as it appeared on this screen. You can see that I rode for about 4 hours and 50 something minutes, and then it's showing that I did an average power of 168 watts, which it says come out to about 2400 kilojoules. If you take the number of seconds that 4 hours and 57 minutes and however many seconds is, and you multiply it times 168, you actually come out around 3000 kilojoules. So I don't really know where they're getting that number from. So then I take the exact same file, export it to Strava, and it says that I did 183 watts and that I did 3250 kilojoules of work. If I multiply the time and average power in Strava, I actually get the kilojoules number that's displayed there, so we're complying with the metric system. All of this is pretty unfortunate because otherwise this device works as you would expect it. It tracks where I went, how much elevation I gained, and the Strava Live segment page is a big improvement on the Garmin because you can customize it and add up to 7 different data fields, such as your power or your heart rate. But what they really need to do is issue some sort of firmware update so that 1, everything on here complies with the metric system, and 2, that the data displayed on the screen here actually matches what is being written into the file that this thing is producing. But until they can issue a firmware update that fixes these huge problems, I actually don't want this thing out here in front of me during a ride. It's not a training aid, it's a training risk. So until then, I'm going to keep this thing in my back pocket and hope that they come out with that firmware update.